In all honesty, I was thinking, please, don't make him get worse. Like I was just really praying that he's not gonna get worse after this stress. And some people actually question whether this dog is really 31. The most striking difference between the way all of us feed our dogs and that he sources all his food from the village. I know that there's a combination of elements and factors why Bobby is as long living as he is, but I cannot hide my emotions when I'm talking about it, because it's just like, and I don't want to hide them, but it's like it's been one of the most spiritual experiences of the past several years, for sure. Like, we are not here to tell them you have to stay for us a little longer. And it's also not failure if some dogs live shorter lives than others. But obviously out of, for selfish reasons, we want them to live long. I started supplementing with other supplements, then I felt that we could do better. I was asked to do to create a formula for minerals and amino acids for a pet food company in the early days. And then I started seeing these amazing changes. I've seen really kind of like beautiful recoveries from complex situations and conditions. And if we don't look after it, we're going to fail to maintain health.
Hello, my name's Catherine Edwards, host of the Live, Love, Learn podcast. And in today's episode, you are in for a real treat. Now, this is about dog owners, and my guest, Dr. Peter Tobias, who's been on my channel before, he is one of the world-leading holistic vets that has really devoted his life to educating all of us about how to help our dogs live a long, happy life. But this podcast isn't just for dog owners. Everything we talk about today can be applied to any animal in your life, and equally important to us, our humans, because never has it been more true that happy human, healthy human means healthy dog, and vice versa. So let's all learn from each other. There's so much more than 5 tips in here. I promise you that every single person, regardless of whether you're a dog parent or not, regardless of whether you've grown up with animals or they're new to you, or you just want to understand more about the decisions you make and the impact. So we discuss Bobby, the world's oldest dog, 31 years old, the impact of social interaction and freedom of choice, and not micromanaging too much in either your own life or your animal's life. Of course, diet, exercise, nutrition, and chemicals in and out, detoxing the body, healthy teeth. There's so much in here for everyone. So please sit back, enjoy, stay curious, and let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I am really, really delighted to be back with one of my absolutely favourite guests on my podcast, Dr. Peter Tobias. Now, last time Peter was on my show, I will put the link to the video below. We had a really amazing conversation about how we could be the best dog parents. And Peter shared a lot of his personal story about how he's accumulated the vast array of knowledge that he has. And this time we're going to be discussing 5 tips on how to help your dogs live a long and healthy life. But even though we're going to be talking about dogs today, everything we talk about will apply to any other animals in your life, and very importantly, yourselves. So don't forget to include yourself in it. I just wanted to say that today's episode is sponsored by ASEA redox signaling molecules. Now, it comes in 2 forms, the liquid and the gel, plus there's a huge other product range for us. But why did I start taking ASEA, and why is it now an integral part of something that my whole family, both 4-legged and 2-legged, take every single day? Plus also something that all the clients I work with, again, 4-legged and 2-legged, it's number 1 on my priority list. Well, part of what I do, what I'm passionate about, is understanding the challenges that are affecting each and every one of us in today's modern living. The more you know, the more sometimes you wish you didn't know, but the pollution in the air, in the water, in the food, the control of our minds, the propaganda. But one of the things that we can do is take back responsibility for our own health. Now, every single cell of our body, whether we're an animal, whether we're one of the dogs in the backgrounds or one of my plants, contain these redox signaling molecules. And cellular health and cellular communication is absolutely key, whether you want to get your body back in balance, whether you want to reverse the aging process, whether you want to address any particular challenges that you've got physically, emotionally. It all starts with healthy cells. If your liver cells are healthy, your liver's healthy. If your brain cells are healthy, your brain's healthy. But just like a mobile phone, most of us have got mobile phones that we use on a routine basis now. But that mobile phone, regardless of whether you've got the latest model, is completely useless without a signal. So what does this technology do? The gel is something that you can apply topically over particular areas of concern, whether you want your skin to look better, whether you've got cellulite, whether you've got an area that's causing you a challenge. The liquid is something you drink each and every day to top up what should be in your cells anyway. But when our bodies are stressed, diseased, challenged, or as we age, we make less of them. So personally, I wouldn't be without it. My sleep's better, my energy levels are better, my mood's better, my mobility's better. If you want to find out more, the details are below. But I'm so grateful that this came into my life, and I'm so grateful I can share it with others. I hope you love it as much as I do. Let me know. Peter, before we get started, for those people that haven't watched your first interview, and I would really encourage people to go back and watch the link below to watch that. But you've inspired me for so long because you've got over 30 years of experience as a veterinarian, but in a background, both holistic and conventional veterinary medicine. So it's given you a really great perspective on the way that you approach health for yourself and for all animals, animal homeopathy, natural nutrition. And you sold your Thriving Vet practice in Vancouver, Canada, back in 2008 to really pursue your passion for educating the public about disease prevention and natural treatments. And that's how I found out about you. And, you know, you're one of the main people that's really helping people do that. And with your goal of helping dog lovers, but any animal parent, really understand how we can help our dogs live long and healthy lives. So first and foremost, welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm great. I'm really happy to be here. I've been so excited the whole morning. I was thinking, okay, we're going to talk to Catherine. And, when I'm listening to you, all I am kind of reminding myself, it's just about learning continuously. It's actually, maybe we have a little bit of knowledge and we gather more and we can make some difference, but the learning never stops. So, I don't want it to sound too grand because really, like, we're constant students, like bachelor students. And it's humbling to know how much knowledge there is that we haven't discovered. And it's really exciting to actually hear other people discovering new things and learning from each other and kind of being in a community of like-minded people. That's really nice. So I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you so much. And I agree with you. There's so much to learn. I mean, I've got my two dogs. We've got Indy on the sofa behind. Lola's just at my feet here. And these two dogs I've had dogs all my life. I'm so lucky I've grown up with animals of all species, loads of species. I like a lot more. But they've taught me so much and are continuing to do, because they've still got a few challenges that I haven't got to the bottom of yet. So, every person we interact with, every animal we interact with, there's so much we can learn from each other. And you had the most amazing experience. I saw you, Dr. Karen Becker, who is amazing, Rodney Habib, who's amazing. You guys had the pleasure of meeting Bobby, the world's oldest verified recorded dog, who is 31 years old. I mean, I was blown away by this, Peter. Please talk us through that experience.
Oh my goodness. I actually had planned something else on the weekend when the birthday was happening. And I called my friend who I was supposed to visit in the UK and said, I got this invite to see the oldest dog in the world. And would you mind if we just kind of change the date? Because I'm really curious. So she graciously agreed. And I took my dog Pax and we flew to Portugal. For those people who don't know how I fly with my dog, I'm a sleepwalker. I sleepwalk through glass door. And when I was in my 20s and I almost died. So I actually have a service dog who can help me and prevent me from doing that again. So anyway, we flew to Portugal, and we met Dr. Becker and Rodney, and the first evening we actually met the canine community in Lisbon, and it was really great. Like I usually am not a big fan of big crowds and so on, but this was a really small group, and they were just so nice and really excited. So it's exciting to be there. What I noticed that Portuguese people are really they are so full of kindness, and they live with their heart. And so the next morning we woke up and we drove to the birthday. We actually were invited to a lunch with Bobby and his family. And so we kind of got an insight into the simplicity of their life. So we drove into this little quiet village. And, there's a very small house with a garden beside it. Beautiful, lush garden. I'm a gardener, so I noticed that immediately. And as we were walking through the main gate, Bobby was actually chased by this little girl who was trying to pet him all the time. And there were not many people, so it was very sweet to actually see this dog who looked more like he was 15-ish, maybe 16, 17. And I couldn't really wrap my head around it that it was actually a dog. So there was a dog that is 31. So first, there's so much to talk about. Obviously, we said hi to Bobby, and the interesting part is that he doesn't actually have gray hair, and he does have basically genetic predisposition to longevity and no gray hair. So this dog doesn't really look 31. He doesn't even on the outside. He's a little chunky and so on. And some people would kind of comment, "Oh, he's heavy. He's fat." He's fat 31. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
Pax, my dog, and Bobby met, and I was just kind of thinking maybe they kind of learn from each other. Maybe Pax can learn a few tricks. But the whole noon or the lunchtime was very simple. We got a dish of sardines, some salad and fruit salad, and it was all just really simple in a tent-like setting. And one thing I noticed that on the ground, instead of basically having some sort of pavement, there was soil. And then on top of the soil, they actually put cut grass and rosemary. So everything smelled like rosemary. And so every time I smell rosemary now, I remember Bobby and the whole family. So, again, just very simple environment. And Lionel, the owner or guardian of Bobby, I'm not going to call him owner. We're not owners of our dogs. He is actually the most strikingly intelligent, but also very simple person who has been thrown into this kind of like celebrity status a little bit. And it was actually his friend who decided that Bobby should be known to the world, and he filed the application. And then basically they did all the DNA testing and telomere testing to make sure that this is actually correct, and the veterinary records testing. And some people actually questioned whether this dog is really 31. I know that Lionel has made zero money from this. He actually refused any donations or anything like that, and he just basically, I trust him 100%.
Yeah,
that was, and talking to him, there was this genuine kind of love that is beyond the love that I witness on regular basis. Like it was just like a connection. Like he was 6 when Bobby was born in the little shed on the property, and he even showed us the little shed where he was born. And they're just like twins. Like it almost like they're just like so connected on the soul level that there's like it was just so beautiful to watch, and some of the interactions when they kind of connected and so on. And then Bobby was very willing. In the afternoon, there was about 25 guests and 80 media, but the media were actually not too obnoxious, because these days people have basically small little camera and microphone at the most. And Bobby, actually, we could see we were a little worried that it's going to be too much for Bobby. But he kind of paced himself to a certain degree, and he put himself away during the celebration. And then, the villagers and the whole village came and they were dancing, and Bobby was in the middle, and it was just really sweet.
Mm.
Obviously, photo shoot and all that stuff was done, and I was really happy actually when the celebration was over. And the next day we came for Facebook Live with Rodney and Karen, and Bobby was just kind of hanging out. He was resting. He was quite tired after that, and we were a little worried that that he overdid it. And in all honesty, I was thinking, please, 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 don't make him get worse. Like, I was just really praying that he's not gonna get worse after this stress. But he seemed to recover, and on that second day we had a little bit more connection with Lionel, and he said, I said, first, you've inspired all of us, because he was thanking us for advice and giving him some suggestions and so on. But I said, we're learning from you.
Mm.
It's not the other way around. Like, we can give you some suggestions how to deal with certain issues, but we're learning from you, and we want to know. And so he obviously, we talked a little bit about his food and about his diet and so on. The most striking difference between the way all of us feed our dogs and that he sources all his food from the village.
Yes.
From meat to the vegetables and to the well water. But we can't really replicate this kind of environment very easily. Most of us can't. But I could see the garden was just lush and rich, no chemicals. The well water, he was pointing to the well that was in the back of the garden, and they have the municipal water, but Bobby was getting the well water. Bobby was eating the meat from the village, where he would barter vegetables for meat and so on, or eggs, and so there's still this kind of like barter system. And I know that there's a combination of elements and factors why Bobby is as long living as he is. But, if I could summarize, I think that it's really like great start. Not much of an invasive therapy or veterinary care. I didn't ask him about the vaccines, but I doubt that he was getting anything beyond the initial ones. Definitely local chemical-free food. But there are some other things, definitely love and the care from the owner, the connection. But Bobby also would, every day at 4 o'clock, he would basically get up and he would go to see the village dogs.
Yes.
So he would go for a walk, and he would see his group, right? It's like, I can only compare it to this group of old men that I see at a local village here in the Czech Republic when I go to swim. There's this group of 4 guys, and they just kind of walk together with the canes, and they're really funny, and they sometimes say something inappropriate, like guys, right? And so I see Bobby doing the same thing, that he goes to see his dogs and socialize. And social fitness is super important. He also has obviously other dogs around, and he had his best friend was a cat that actually passed away this year, so that was really hard for Bobby. And he obviously was quite sad. He wanted to make connections with packs quite a bit, and he definitely thrives on being with other dogs and with people. So that was it. I could talk forever, but one more thing that I don't think I'll ever remember, and it was very humbling and also reassuring that we all are the same. Lionel and I talked about the time when Bobby's not going to be here, and he basically said, I am so unprepared. I have no idea what I'm going to do when he's not here, because my life revolves around him, and he also cares for his mother. He actually lost a brother a few years back. So, basically, he was very honest about how unprepared he was. And as we were talking, I thought of us not really having a solution, and there is no solution for dogs to even living longer. Obviously, we all would like them to live longer.
Mm.
Imagine that dogs would eventually reach age of 40 or 50, let's say, with science and research and whatever the future brings. Then it would bring the problem of us not wanting to have a dog because we would have to leave them behind. So
Yeah.
my general sense is as long as possible, but for me, I would not want to leave my dog behind.
Yeah.
So maybe with a little bit of practice and personal growth and development, I'd say, hey, I'm going to introduce you to other people who you will have fun with and be happy. But it would be difficult too. There's no simple solution, I think. Yeah, so we left Portugal with Pax, and I came home and I couldn't stop thinking about Bobby. And we put him actually for mobility. We put him on some, and for regeneration, we put him on omega oils and heavy doses of that, and he's doing really well. He's had a little bit of an ulcer around his bum, so I helped Lionel to kind of, I taught him how to clean it and how to treat it, and that was really, at least I could do a little bit. But really, in summary, um, both Dr. Becker, Rodney, and we all were thinking like, what an experience, what a treasure, I can't even describe how much it impacted me on so many levels. And the other thing is, when we came back from Portugal, I I thought, why don't we just do a little bit of a fundraiser? Like, nobody has given actually Lionel money for the party or anything. Some of the entities would ask for a party, and media would come and so on, but he would actually pay for it himself. And so I thought, why don't we just collect some money? And Dr. Becker and Rodney had already that conversation, and Lionel basically said, absolutely not. And I said, well, I didn't have the conversation with him, so I can possibly organize the fundraiser, and then I'll let him know, and I hope that he'll be okay by then. So we actually started the fundraiser, and I called him and I said, I hope you don't mind, but we'd like to actually express our gratitude for Bobby. And I know that it'll be, there will be veterinary expenses and other expenses down the road. So can we actually organize a fundraiser through the community? And he basically said, absolutely not. So as soon as we organized it, we had to shut it down and return the money that was donated. And so some people say that Lionel, did it for the money. And I know for sure that he didn't.
Yeah.
And he basically, I think that one of the reasons why he didn't want to have anything to do with the fundraiser was that he didn't want people to think that he did it for money. So it was, on some level, it was beautiful. It was also a little frustrating because I know that we wanted to express our gratitude, and the money could be used either for Bobby or for research or whatever. But it's I respect that decision. It was touching. I trust that you can. I think I cannot hide my emotions when I'm talking about it, because it's just like, and I don't want to hide them, but it's like it's been one of the most spiritual experiences of the past several years, for sure. So
I mean, when I saw Dr. Karen and yourself and Rodney out with him, it reminded me, what came to my mind when I walk out in the forest and you see a really old tree, and you just know that tree has seen so much and got so much wisdom to share. That's exactly how I felt when I saw Bobby, because I think you touched on so many important things, which we'll go back over about the, how we can help and what we can learn from these situations. But actually, where I'd like to start is that almost lack of interference, sort of being there to sort of be a good guardian for him, but allowing him also to make some choices and live his own life. And when I think I saw Dr. Karen talk about how he takes off for his little walk, and he's very rarely, I think she was saying he's hardly ever on the lead. And even though I live in the middle of the countryside, I'm not in a position there, because obviously the dogs could get run over, and it made me really think about how much through love in our hearts we try, and because of the way we live now, we try and micromanage every aspect of our animals' care. I mean, I've just got 2 foster rabbits, and I'm so happy because we've built this amazing great big run for them. It's huge, and we've dug down and put wow underneath because we've got foxes, and obviously they dig, and my guinea pigs don't dig, so I haven't had that problem. And as soon as put them out there, they've been out there less than a week, and I swear to God, Peter, they're like different rabbits. All their instincts have come back like that. They're vibrant, they're jumping about like little spring bunnies, they're digging, really digging, which of course bunnies should dig. And how us humans can get this, we want to keep our animals safe, but we also, any animal needs to be allowed to live like that species lives. It's a real dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah, in my mind, it's actually not a dilemma as much as how do we practically apply it. This reminded me of a book that I'm just kind of reading. It's called Lead and Inspire, I think. I would have to look on my phone. I can't remember exactly, but I know that there's Inspire in the title. And it's by Stephen Covey, who everyone knows. So you can even look it up if you don't want to confuse people. But, I think that with dogs, it should be exactly like that. So we need to lead them, but we need to inspire them to be independent and be kind of like give them the freedom. I get incredibly frustrated seeing how much kind of bossing around there is with dogs. And actually, we don't necessarily do it out of bad intention. We just don't realize what we are doing. And that these beings are at our mercy. They definitely don't have the freedom that we can exercise. And then we put them on the lead, we jerk them around. Just the idea of a collar is crazy if you think about it. People use these retractable leashes that damage a lot of the nerves and blood vessels and thyroid gland on the neck. So I'm a big proponent of harnesses, but beyond that, and it's really interesting for me to live in 3 different places. I basically am from the Czech Republic, where I spend quite a bit of time now because it's my heart place and just amazing. It's also the most dog-free country, meaning that people give their dogs freedom beyond what I've seen anywhere else. There's about 70% of dogs on the street in the city of Prague walking off leash and walking well.
Wow.
And this kind of made me realize when I started coming back here that dogs are fully capable of understanding the concept of the sidewalk, of where they should walk and where they don't walk. But if we don't give them the freedom, and if we don't train them enough, then they're out of control and they don't respect cars. They don't really understand that. And there's differences between dogs, of course. We have to be mindful. And then there is Canada, and interesting enough, with the freedom, there is like fewer aggressions. In Prague, a lot of dogs are neutered. In Europe, a lot of dogs are neutered, and they actually get along. Most of them get along just fine. In Canada, there's great outdoor spaces, but the restrictions are much greater. If you go on a walk, you have to put your dog on the leash here, take it off here. It's totally confusing, but even more so, dogs are not used to socializing together.
Yeah.
And they're so much more aggressive. And maybe not aggressive, they're just anxious and they flip out because they just don't know how to behave. On top of that, there is still the recommendation that puppies should not be socialized until 4 months of age, which is criminal. It's like telling parents you can't make your dog or make your child see other children until they're 6 or 10 years old, right? So it just doesn't really work. So I think that with more restriction, there is more behavioral issues.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, I see the same with people. The more rules there are, the more people act out, and the more people are not happy. And comparing Prague, Vancouver, and then Maui, it's very interesting. The North American culture is much more prone to. We're much more prone to tell people what to do.
Yes.
We're more prone to, you shouldn't do that and you shouldn't do that. Well, everyone breaks the rules sometimes, right? But people are so keen to tell others what to do, which almost never happens unless I run into a foreigner and then I'll have to explain, you're visiting here and it's our culture and we are really proud of it. So tough luck.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting. And Maui is somewhere between Vancouver and Prague. I would say that dogs are free, much more freedom, but then there will be people who are going to, I call it flip out of dogs. And some people have, rightfully so, negative experiences around dogs. So I think I'm not saying that we should disrespect them, but I don't think that we should limit our dogs just because someone had a negative experience with the dog in the past. It's like if there is it's like punishing all people just because there are a few criminals.
Yes.
And so I really think that we as a society need to evolve to respect dogs. We're going back to that freedom, and Bobby is a good example. Like I don't think that he's been on a leash actually in his lifetime.
It's amazing, and I think. Yeah. So I agree. I think giving an animal of whatever species, human, rabbit, dog, some freedom, as much freedom as you possibly can, to me, trumps a lot of the other things, because actually when you get to make different decisions. It's interesting for me with my dogs I've got at the moment. When I had my 2 Labradors, even though one of them was a rescue, easiest dogs ever to train ever. These 2 different matter. They've come from a traumatized background. And one of them has got fear aggression, which I've never had before. So it's really interesting to see how myself as her parent, I'm still on that learning curve about how to handle that, because obviously I have a responsibility to keep other dogs safe. Yes. Equally, it's very difficult not to get into that vicious circle. So it's a steep learning curve, I must say. And, I had a day out with a friend yesterday, Peter, and we were in a park just outside London. It's called Bushy Park, and it's a suburban park, but it's probably about 100 acres or so. So not that big, but big enough to, be quite nice for people who live in London. And it's got loads of deer there. And someone let their dog off the lead with all the deer, who, of course, are having their fawns at the moment. And it was just causing carnage and chasing this poor deer everywhere. And this is the problem, isn't it? It's like one stupid person can ruin it for everyone, and then you get this blanket. And of course it wasn't the poor dog's fault, because the dog was going to chase the deer because it hadn't been chained. Otherwise it had no recall, because the owner I watched it for an hour and he had no chance of getting it back. But freedom is so important, because it crushes the spirit, doesn't it? And it crushes the soul. And if you don't let any being make some choices, it's like they've done a lot of studies, I think, with humans, that when you don't have a purpose and you don't have choice in your life, then it's not a great outcome. Sorry.
But I definitely, there's the other side of the coin, where some dogs are even naturally, genetically predisposed to be out of control, and they just can't be controlled.
Yeah.
There is poor breeding. There are certain breeds that are much more difficult to control, and so it's up to us to decide what the degree of freedom is for our dogs. But our goal should be, even if it's, let's say, in a backyard or in when visiting friends, that our dogs have friends. Our dogs have they socialize with others, that we show them that chickens and rabbits are not to chase. And most dogs will understand it, and some will not. And again, it's our responsibility. But, if we can kind of summarize, having this excessive control doesn't lead to happy dogs. Having this excessive control doesn't lead to happy people. I really think that, the society kind of cycles between anarchy and too much restrictions. And I've seen that. I grew up in the Eastern Bloc, and then I went to Canada, and it was really great and free. And suddenly I just kind of started to see some signs of the freedoms and restrictions being different. I would see police raiding, young people's bags at the beach just in case they have alcohol and so on. And I was terrified. I was thinking, oh my goodness, like this is communism starting all over again. Yeah. And as time progressed, like obviously that has become more and more. And now we almost can have a different opinion than the mainstream, and that's become a big contentious issue in obviously in our society and politics. And I think that for people to travel and see that there can be organized society without being controlled, there can be organized dog community without being excessively
Yeah.
controlled. Having these dog park ghettos where it's really traumatic for many dogs. I
Yeah.
don't believe in it, but at the same time, like just kind of just it is so true that the level of development of society is reflected in how we treat animals, right? Overall.
Very much
It's
so.
really and in the UK, Catherine, you guys are at the forefront of being the dog lovers and animal lovers extraordinary. Every time I end up in the UK, I am blown away how much more advanced you are, and polite and respectful. Like I spent the weekend in the UK with my friend, and yeah, it was really nice. It was really nice to see.
I think, we do generally love animals, but I think, the problem is there's a lot of lack of education now, in terms of how to keep them, because a lot of people have lost that connection with nature and the land, and what you grew up with thinking was just pretty common sense. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that haven't had that, and therefore they do need telling again, which is really important. Which brings me on to my next subject, which is the food. Now, food is something you've been teaching people about dog nutrition for a long while, because you've seen both sides of the scale about what getting it wrong can have such disastrous effects, of course, for ourselves as well. And the challenge is now is a lot of people will go into their supermarket and most of it isn't real food. But you noticed that Bobby was eating really locally and natural human food, not out of a can, not out of a bag.
Yeah, so there were some moments actually when we learned what Bobby ate that
Yeah.
were quite shocking, because Bobby gets onions on regular basis, cooked onions and some stews and raw vegetables. So it's not all raw meat, and it's more of a stew kind of diet, with basically just everything thrown in it. And I think that he gets some table scraps as well. I know from the information that I got from the people around Bobby that there were some attempts to actually quieten the owner to that he doesn't feed kibble. But obviously that didn't happen. But I'm not gonna get into the politics of it. But obviously, learning that a dog that is 31 has never had kibble is not
Yeah.
good for business. So I'm a big believer that truth always wins. When the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic happened in 1989, Václav Havel, the first president, his motto was "Truth always wins." And this is about medicine, about health. Like no matter what entity tries to kind of hide information or tries to convince us otherwise, the truth will always seep through. And it may not be through the professional circles, it may be through just us talking as a community. And I think that there's a lot of positive development, and it doesn't need to be through nastiness or accusing each other. I know that those people who make, let's say, processed food, they believe, most of them, or at least some of them believe that that's what is best for dogs.
Yeah.
But on some level, it doesn't really make sense, because I don't know any medical doctor that would tell their patients to eat a lot of processed food and wholesome food would not be good, right? Like you don't hear a doctor saying that. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy that is hard to hide. Like sometimes with politics of food and diet, it is so blatantly wrong.
Yes.
If you try to hide it, like eventually you just kind of start contradicting yourself, because it just doesn't make sense, right? So going back to Bobby, his diet has been very, very simple but local, and I think that that's important, and non-processed, and a combination of meat and vegetables, which we do. but it would be really nice to have more conversations with Lionel about his diet, and I definitely plan to do that. We've been in touch, and I'd like to learn as much as I can. But there's another part, and that's the genes,
Mm.
which plays an important role. However, to say that, Lionel believes that having dogs over 20 is normal.
I wanted to get on with this too, because this is our perception of what normal. You and I were talking off camera about we're a very similar age, and we were talking about, isn't it funny how the perception of what a 60-year-old person should be like, and our perception now when we speak to most dog parents is, they'll think a 12-year-old lab is really old. It's this sort of brainwashing of what is the new normal, which I hate to use that phrase, but when you've got an attitude like Lionel, where, because I noticed that some of his other dogs had lived to over 20 as well. Mm-hmm. How important is that perception and that expectation? Because that must affect how
the belief. Catherine, obviously I can't really talk in absolutes here because nobody knows how the universe works. But I have been for the longest time, I've been a big proponent of not really telling people what their dog's life expectancy is, because I think that often if someone said to someone, your dog will live up to 13 or 15, the dog basically dies at 13 or 15. And I've noticed that. So I don't give people prognosis. Like I would say prognosis is, good or poor or not very good, but I would never give them a number.
Yeah.
Whether it comes to disease diagnosis or whether it comes to just life expectancy of a breed. And I do think that there is a lot to do. Like our perception matters. I do really think, and the level of our worry matters. I love the saying, a little bit of benign neglect is good for our dogs. It's good for our children. It's good for anyone. A little bit of benign neglect and love, a lot of love and a little bit of benign neglect for sure.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean not to take your dog for walks, but not worry about them as much, not micromanage them, just kind of letting them be, trusting that their ability to decide for themselves how long they'll be here is actually their own. Like we are not here to tell them you have to stay for us a little longer. And it's also not failure if some dogs live shorter lives than others, but obviously out of, for selfish reasons, we want them to live long. But learning to be relaxed a little more about their senior years, learning to come to accept that they're not going to be here forever, super important. And I think part of the longevity plan as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, the great thing is the older any of us get, the more we know what we want to do, the more we sort of tune in with ourselves and we understand, how much we can or can't push ourselves. And our dogs are exactly the same. I mean, my dogs are coming up 6 now, and they're really happily lying here, fast asleep. But when they were younger, they were a lot more playful, but they know that dogs are so good at knowing when they need to rest, when they need to play, when they want to exercise, etc. It's fantastic to watch. I certainly learn a lot from them. Yeah,
absolutely.
But going back to the diet, just because this is such an important one for people, the biggest thing I get people saying to me is it's so complicated knowing what to feed my diet. And I always, my answer is, well, just think rabbit.
Yes.
Think, what is a rabbit composed of? Sorry, rabbits. I love rabbits.
Or chicken, or
or something like that. And actually, when you think back for that, so how do you approach that, Peter? And for people that are over worrying about it, because that can go both ways. There's some people who say, who don't worry at all and just feed them a can of tuna each day, and because it's not dog food, think it's fine. And then there's others that micromanage. What would be your biggest message for any dog owner listening at the moment when they're looking at their diet?
Yeah, relax. Actually, people don't worry about their kids actually, measuring every single gram of amino
Yeah.
acids and omega oils and everything like, and nutrients and calcium and this and that. The body is quite intelligent. And if we don't clutter it with junk and toxins and give it healthy, balanced diet that is close to the natural diet of canines, then we are fine. And, again, there are certain ratios and proportions. I put together a little recipe maker that people can use, and it just kind of gives you an idea of what the proportions could be and what choices you have. But ultimately, it is really it's quite simple. What I do, I feed bones, I feed meat and vegetables, and sometimes I feed organs. I must confess that I don't feed organs as often because they're not as easy to get. Yeah. And sometimes they may not be organic, and I don't want to give junk to my dog. But some dogs are quite happy to eat vegetables on their own. And the range of vegetable proportions are anywhere from 10 to 30%. You just basically have to see what your dog does well on. The dogs that are hotter, that are running hot, they do better on green vegetables and more of them. There are certain principles of what meats dogs do well on. The colder dogs would do better on poultry and warming meats. The hotter dogs would not do well on poultry in general and would do better on cooling meats. The principles I find really correlate and are aligned with the Chinese medicine principles. And I've observed it in many dogs. My first dog was Chili, and he was great on poultry. Pax is hot, he's not great on poultry. So I don't necessarily force it. Dogs like to scavenge. I'm not really opposed to even give dogs healthy leftovers when it comes to our own food. And the idea that dogs should not get salt and all the other animals get salt and salt licks and so on, again, it just doesn't make sense. And I think that it was one of the ways of the pet food industry to convince people they must not feed human food. And I don't see a problem actually to give some leftovers. What else? I don't really like to give dogs dairy. No mammals consume dairy past their weaning. I find dairy aggravating for many dogs and people. Plus, most people don't realize that dairy is basically produced by taking the calves away from their mothers and milking the cows. Just recently, I was watching a video clip of Pink. She's got a video clip for the song Raise Your Glass.
Yeah.
She actually blatantly and very clearly opposed to that idea of milking cows. And she put the milking machines on women and feed the calves just to kind of see how ridiculous it is. And, there's so many milk replacements and coconut and almond and oatmeal and all that. We don't really need that. So, and dogs definitely don't need that. And milk is it taxes the immune system. It's not really good because it has a lot of, bacteria and protein. It's kind of a live food, right? So most of the time, it's pasteurized in some situations, but it does have still some, it's not really that healthy for the immune system to consume a lot of milk for many people and most animals. What else? When you feed eggs, I would give obviously organic free range eggs. I am not too keen feeding too much fish, but in contrary to my belief, Bobby has been getting sardines and he's fine. My concern about sardines was that strontium from the nuclear disaster in Japan actually gets in the bones of small fish, and we eat sardines with the bones. So that was my concern, but I'm seeing Bobby actually living up to 31, and I had to really look at it critically and say, okay, maybe I'm wrong. And it happens to us all the time that we realize whatever we believed in, suddenly it doesn't apply. But there's this kind of like golden solid center where that is true, that is really undeniably correct. And then there are these little bits and pieces that you may need to change.
Yeah.
But,
What about timing of food, Peter, and how often dogs
Yeah,
are fed?
yeah. Again, different approaches. And the reason why I paused here is I don't really know how often Bobby is fed.
Mm.
My general sense is that it's actually healthier for dogs to fast, meaning that once a day feeding is great. Don't feed your dog before exercise. I don't like to feed my dog late in the evening because then the sleep is not as good. And micro or intermittent fasting is actually a good idea for dogs, meaning that if you don't feed your dog 24 hours or feed your dog once every 24 hours, that's probably optimal and ideal. In nature, they would not have regular meals. So some people panic. They would have to drop everything and leave an event or visit with friends because their dog is going to go crazy at 6 p.m. So I actually feed my dog irregularly. I don't feed him on regular basis because it's easier for them. And I do the same thing with me. Like sometimes I have breakfast at 11. If I don't make it, I'll have lunch and I won't have breakfast at all. And the fasting actually activates these regeneration systems, certain enzymes and gene repair, and it just kind of like starvation on some level. Healthy starvation, temporary starvation is actually good for the body because it allows the body to cleanse. It allows the body to regenerate and recoup. Having these snacks and having these, 5 or 6 meals a day, it's kind of insane. And for dogs, unless there's a medical reason, I definitely don't recommend feeding adult dogs more than once a day. When it comes to puppies, I usually feed them 3 times a day until about 5-6 months of age. Then they start skipping one meal. You just feed twice a day, and then once a day, maybe starting 12 to 14, 16 months, somewhere there. And the only other thing I wanted to say, some people feed too much, and now I notice that many people actually keep their dogs really skinny. If the muscle development is not really good, and if the backbone is sloping, if the hip bones are prominent, those are all signs that dogs are malnourished. I have a simple chart on the recipe maker where people can learn what the ideal condition is. Ideally, I always say count the ribs. You should be able to count the ribs. But if you wet your dog, if it's a long-haired dog, or if your dog is short hair, you should not see the ribs.
Yes.
And the backbone should be nice and round and muscled. I've been to the UK. I had been there last week for a few days, and I noticed that the herding dogs at the farm nearby were really, really skinny. And obviously, I couldn't really say anything. But, kibble diet, skinny, beautiful creatures. And it broke my heart to actually see how malnourished and how out of shape they are, despite their performance and despite, working really hard. They're just not getting right nutrition. And it was hard. Like I walked to one of the farms and I walked by the kennels and I had to turn around because I could see caged dogs that basically, I know they're working dogs, but I think that we really need to change the attitude that a farm dog should be a caged up dog, should be a dog without any social interaction, should be a dog separated from their humans. It just does not make sense. And so we really need to, sometimes we are too kind and too polite and don't want to raise these issues with the farmers, but we have to. Because it's about the animals. We really have to think of what is more important, whether it's our conflict-free life or speaking up for those who can.
I 100% agree. And, a lot of the time, yes, sometimes you will get a very negative response, but 9 times out of 10, I think it provokes that person to go home and think about it, and if you're planting those seeds and I see it a lot with horses, because I live in a big horsey area, and that's a lot of my work is with horses as well, and the tack that people put on them and everything is absolutely barbaric now. And I do say something, and a lot of the time it's very much not appreciated. But it's planted the seeds, and then you do see changes. Might take a week, it might take 10 years, but at least if you're being an advocate, because as you say, a lot of the time it's because people are living busy lives and they just haven't thought to ask the question. Yeah. So we've got freedom, we've got social interaction, we've got feeding. What would be your next sort of biggie in terms of longevity? One of some of the best things we can consider for our dogs?
When it comes to diet, obviously balancing diet, it's been a real eye-opening experience throughout my professional life to see how much we've ignored nutrition and nutrients, because we source our food from soils that are depleted, whether it's the meat or the plants. Now we don't recycle the compost back to the fields, so naturally there's a lot of depletion, and we're not as lucky as Bobby and his dad to live in the village where these principles of healthy agriculture has been maintained. Like most of us actually source food that is depleted. So, I started supplementing with other supplements. Then I felt that we could do better. I was asked to do to create a formula for minerals and amino acids for a pet food company in the early days. And then I started seeing these amazing changes. And they were actually greater than I thought they should be. And then I started to think, because I like to garden as well, and I've been gardening since early age. My grandfather was a herbalist, and he had a whole bunch of herbs, and I picked that. And then in the early, maybe mid-20s, we had a garden here in the Czech Republic before I moved to Canada. So I knew what it looks like, what a depleted plant looks like, what tomato or potato or apple tree looks like when it doesn't have the nutrients. We all recognize it. And I started to think, it makes complete sense, because we are even more complex than plants. And if we don't get all the building blocks, how can we expect the body to thrive and age well and repair itself when it doesn't get the nutrients? So I actually kind of took on the simpler route. I thought, I'm going to create a system that is simple enough for people to be able to follow it, but it will make the most difference. So I didn't really focus as much on specific problems, but created fermented vitamins, created probiotics that are canine specific. Then came on the omega-3s, which were actually the simplest ingredient, at the same time as more complicated because fish is depleted, fish stocks are depleted. There's a lot of farm fish. Krill is not sustainable. We kept running into issues. Plant-based omegas are not really balanced, EPA and DHA. It cannot be really created together, at least for now. Maybe they're going to be able to grow it eventually, but right now it's not possible. The technology is advancing very fast, though. So we ended up with squid oil, which really has been eye-opening as well, because it's really high in not only EPA but also DHA, and that's good for brain and nerve system and regeneration, but it protects the blood-brain barrier. So it actually prevents the brain from getting inflamed. And it has been shown now in research studies that DHA actually prevents dementia and cognitive issues in dogs and people. And it reduces inflammation of the brain, because it starts with the blood-brain barrier being disrupted and not repaired enough. And then the elements or particles or substances that should not get in the brain get in the brain, and it results in inflammation. So huge kind of mind-opening experience with that. There's so much, when it comes to nutrition that we could talk about, but the essential, we call them actually fabulous four, is minerals, vitamins, amino acids. Actually, minerals and amino acids come together, then vitamins, then probiotics, and then omegas. And then once every 6 months, a cleanse. So that's the simplest we can do. And I've seen really kind of like beautiful recoveries from complex situations and conditions, which says or confirms that when you give the body what it needs, the building blocks and the repair ingredients, it does it on its own. And then obviously you're left with some of the conditions where you need to supplement hormones for hypothyroidism or Addison's disease, or you have to treat Cushing's disease or something like that. It's much more complex. But most dogs actually beautifully recover when we provide the nutrients. And then there is another kind of element that I put a lot of emphasis on, and that's spinal health.
Yes.
Huge, huge, huge. Spinal health, in my mind, is like half of the win.
Mm.
So many dogs and so many people have back pain, have back issues, have inflammatory condition along the spine. And I see the spine as the energy highway to the body and to the organs and skin segments and muscles and so on. As soon as the spine is misaligned, the muscles tighten up. It prevents the blood flow and nerve flow and energy flow to the organs and skin segments and muscle segments. And that's how it all starts, right? And then the body and the patient, the dog, human starts compensating, and certain areas get tighter. And again, when they get tighter, the restriction happens in that area, and it's like a vicious circle. And there's two things that you can do actually several things you can do for spinal health, but one of them is definitely exercise and variety of exercise, but also preventing injuries and core strengthening. And there are enough animal physical therapists that will tell you how to exercise older dog, and they will tell you how to adjust the spine when it's congested and when it's injured. I actually did a Pilates class yesterday, and I just misunderstood the teacher, the instructions, and I lifted my legs much more than I was supposed to. And this morning I woke up and I'm feeling a little tension. So I'm experiencing intramuscular needle stimulation or needle therapy. So I put acupuncture needles in a few spots and it's fine. The bizarre thing is that sometimes you learn about these connections between different parts of the body in a personal experience. I had for about 5 days, about 3 months ago, I had really sore throat and I thought I had strep throat or something, and it wasn't getting better. And I was thinking, this is kind of weird. And then I was thinking, my neck is a little sore here. I do a lot of computer work. So I put a few needles in my neck in the middle of the night because my throat really hurt by day 5. I woke up in the morning, zero sore throat. And so it kind of tells you how connected it is. Or dogs that have diarrhea often have lumbar spine issues. Dogs that have cardiac conditions have actually interscapular spinal issues. One of my very dear friends has atrial fibrillation. She's in her 70s. And I just talked to her recently and I said, how is your back pain? How is your back? And I was able to touch her back and she was like a board. And she said, of course, like I have sore back all the time. And that's something that we often forget, that the spine is the highway of the energy in the body. And if we don't look after it, we're going to fail to maintain health.
Yeah, and so many people, it can be quite hard for them to pick up because the dog might not be obviously lame, but when the more trained eye, as you say, luckily there's a lot of good therapists around there now that can work with your dog and show you what to look out for, and then also help you with exercises, well-fitted harness, which I know you're a big proponent of, to actually help prevent the the injury coming back again. So important. One of my dogs, Lola, she's always doing zoomies and twisting and turning, and it makes a difference. But I'm very lucky with her because she tells me straight away. She's really obvious with it, even though she's not lame. She'll look at the area, and I'm a big fan of red light therapy as well, and using that to open up the energy flows. So we've got spinal health, we've got supplementation and sort of detox. We have got food, we've got social, and we've got freedom of choice. Anything else?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Healthy teeth, super important, often neglected for a number of reasons. Number one, people worry about feeding bones to dogs. And there's a useful blog on my website that actually gives people a really good idea what bones are safe and what they're good for. Many people make the mistake of giving marrow bones to large dogs and they crack their teeth, which is quite dangerous. The bones are harder than the teeth, and they crack them. you know, I've seen some dogs having really terrible teeth, and there are people say, I don't want to do anything. It's much safer to actually follow the recommendation of your veterinarian and get teeth cleaned and then maintain them without needing to go for another anesthesia. And I give really detailed instructions. If you go to my website and just search for dental care, it's going to come up with a really detailed blog and also bone feeding instructions and all that. The problem is that when dental care is neglected, when there's tartar buildup, the bacteria will spread in the kidneys and the heart, and it often gets damaged. They often get damaged. Renal failure is very common in dogs that have bad teeth, and so is cardiac insufficiency and valvular disease. So when the bacteria basically harbors in the valves of the heart and will damage the heart. So dental care, try to go with minimal immunization. I am a big proponent of minimizing vaccines. I've never seen a dog ending up with parvovirus or distemper infection past 6 months. And usually there are dogs that are neglected. They come from really poor sanitation environment. They would just be neglected. They would be parasite ridden and so on. So it's not that an average puppy will get parvovirus or distemper, but it can happen. I usually like to wait until 12 weeks, because if you immunize before, and this is something that most people don't know. So if you immunize before, you actually get rid of or you destroy the antibodies, the maternal protection. And I will explain this. Maternal antibodies are acquired through the milk mainly, and sometimes through placenta, in cats more than dogs. But when puppies are immunized through the milk by the immunoglobulins from colostrum, they're protected until about, I'm just going to say 12 to 18 weeks, maybe a little more, a little less at the upper spectrum. But they're protected. And if you give vaccine, the vaccine basically neutralizes, it latches onto the antibodies and basically destroys the antibodies. So dogs that are vaccinated before the immune system can actually produce an antibody response, you basically reduce the immunity. So I strongly encourage people not to vaccinate until the age of 12 weeks. Before 12 weeks, you may want to socialize with puppies from the litter. I don't think that there is any need to expose dogs to other dogs. However, if you do want to, you can measure the antibody levels even before 12 weeks. And if the antibody levels are positive, if there's presence of antibodies against parvo and distemper, then you can actually socialize moderately with other dogs. At 12 weeks, usually I recommend measuring another antibody test. And if it's positive, I don't even recommend vaccinating against distemper and parvo and measure the test one more time in a month. And if it's positive, then it's very likely that if your dog will be socializing with other dogs, then it will just mount an immune response and it's fine. Now, when it comes to parvo and distemper, that's how I dealt with my dogs. And I've dealt with many dogs in my practice and I never had it fail. However, some people may not be comfortable and some of my colleagues will be really unhappy about me suggesting this. But this is how natural immunity happens. Maternal antibodies, then socialization, and basically gradual decline of the maternal antibodies while the acquired antibodies are rising. If you vaccinate at 12 weeks, let's say the antibodies are negative, there's no antibodies, then I would probably recommend giving one vaccine. But in most dogs, only one vaccine is needed, and there's no more boosters needed. So that's the other thing that people don't know and understand. And there's enough fear instilled in the dog community to actually for people to go for the 3 boosters or whatever, 2 boosters. Rabies is a different story. In the UK, you're lucky that you don't have rabies, so you don't need to really give it unless you travel. And in some jurisdictions, it's required, or for travel, it's definitely necessary. So that's something that we can really negotiate. But I think that we can definitely dramatically reduce vaccination. the other thing people complain about is that kennels or daycares require vaccination, and I would always recommend to suggest that you sign a waiver for daycare or something like that if your dog isn't vaccinated, or provide the antibody titer test. When it comes to kennel cough vaccine, I've seen the kennel cough vaccine actually causing as much kennel cough as the kennel cough itself. And sometimes I suspect that the kennel cough vaccine actually has a propensity to spread the virus around, or the bacteria with Bordetella bronchoseptica. That's the causative agent. So, and there's some other vaccines like Giardia vaccine, Lyme disease vaccine. I would stay away from them as much as I could, because for Lyme disease vaccine, for example, when I used to give it in the mid 90s, I saw puppies that would be 1 year old or very young dogs with arthritis and spondylosis of their back, and I am convinced that it was from the vaccine. I don't have a definite proof, but it is just unheard of that young dogs would have severe arthritic changes repeatedly. And that's one of the reasons I suspect why the vaccine has not been approved in people, because it's just not safe.
Yeah.
So, ticks are a big problem, of course. What else? You asked me what else would I add. I think that try to use drug treatment of any kind as the last form of defense. In most of the situations, we don't really need to treat diseases with drugs, and in some situations we do, and we're grateful to have them, but we have to be mindful and careful. And obviously, healthy humans. Healthy humans are super important to healthy dogs and healthy animals. Like if we are healthy, if we are in good shape, I think that our dogs really benefit from that. Cardio exercise, which is kind of new for me. Like I've been for a long time, I've been recommending dogs to do what they would do in nature, just short periods of sprints here and there, but most of the times trotting and walking and just kind of playing, hanging out. But there's some evidence that short bursts of activity actually may be really good for dogs and people.
Yeah.
People, we call it high intensity interval training, where you basically alternate between high intensity, you get your heart rate really high, and then you have a short period of rest and you repeat it. And there are different approaches and different periods and intervals. But in dogs, I would recommend that too, with one caveat. It's super important not to stand in the park and throw a ball for 45 minutes or 30 minutes. Like it would be okay to do it maybe for 10 minutes and then vary it with other exercises, because if you do too much of one exercise, dogs will get imbalanced, they will get strong and weak, and the imbalances also lead to issues with mobility and arthritis and other challenges.
Yeah, I think that's really key, because you do see a lot of people, if they're short of time, they just go there and just frantically throw the ball for their dogs, and actually it can do a lot of damage. And you often notice the dog will always turn in one direction, so as they're building up imbalances and things. So plus the danger with some of the balls, we still have quite a big problem over here with dogs getting say tennis balls stuck in their mouth and being very dangerous.
Yeah, tennis balls are abrasive as well. Many people don't actually know that tennis balls are like sandpaper, basically. They wear down to nothing in the ball-obsessed dogs. So it's, there's so much that we could talk about.
So much that we can talk about, but I think we've given people a lot of inspiration because, yes, we aren't necessarily all going to, at the moment, have bobbies that live to 31, and there's a lot of different things that come into play. But, go back and listen to our last interview as well, because there was a lot of hints in there that will combine with this. But really, enjoying your dogs, enjoying the time with them, trying to get that balance between educating yourself but not over worrying about things. As you say, I don't know anyone that measures out their children's dinners. So but equally, it's great to sort of enjoy that learning process, isn't it, Peter? And really sort of realize that even if you've been brought up with dogs and have dogs all your life, just keep being curious and keep learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to remember that opinions are not truths. There's we sometimes get into heated debates about issues, and not everything. There's a big range of what is actually what would work, and every dog is different. Every person is different. I forgot to mention one thing, and that is what I notice as well. I notice that people often take their dogs for a walk, and they take them out, but it's the interaction between our dogs and ourselves, the play, the cuddle, the combing, the whatever we do with them that they really thrive on. And I have to remind myself, today is a playtime, and right now I just kind of take the toys out and be silly with my dog, and take time to cuddle or
Yeah.
massage, and they don't always need to be busy, 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 right? Like that happens to dogs and it happens to kids, that we think that children have to be busy and they have to go from activity to activity, and parents go
On the sofa, so sweet.
and just hanging out. Exactly,
Yeah.
just being there present and making sure that they have social engagement, that they have their friends, that we actually truly call up a friend and say, hey, can I bring your dog? Can I take your dog to my place, or vice versa? If you go for walks, just create a circle of friends where you can actually hang out together. It would be really sad for dogs, I think, if they were just lonely. And many dogs are lonely.
Mm.
And there may be senior people who no longer want to get their own dog, but they would be very happy to dog sit, um, and walk dogs.
Yes.
It's there's so many options. I think we just have to get out of our shelf a little bit. Shell, not shelf. Sometimes I mix up my English. We have to get out of our shell to and get out there and connect with others, because our dogs benefit from it.
They really do, and so do we. And definitely happy dog, happy human, happy human, happy dog. Get that balance right. Thank you so, so much. I've absolutely loved it, as always. Really, really appreciate all your time, all your
Thank
wisdom.
you.
I'll put all the links to
My pleasure,
Peter's
Catherine.
website. Your website blogs are absolutely brilliant. I'm always referring to them. I love them. Really well written, really, really helpful. So there's so much free information on Peter's website, and of course some brilliant supplements, so please do go and have a look at those.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter.
Really nice to
Speak
talk to
soon.
you, and I look forward to the next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And if you feel inspired, please do share with your friends and family. My goal is to inspire as many people as I can to live their best lives, to stay curious, and to raise their consciousness and that of the collective. So to do this, I need to reach as many people as possible, and this needs your help. If you feel drawn, would you be willing to share your favourite episode with 5 different people? This helps us spread the word and also helps me encourage some exciting new guests to take part in this podcast. If you feel drawn to do that, I will be very, very grateful. All the links and discount codes where applicable for all the products that I support are on my 2 websites, catherineedwards.life and catherineedwardsacademy.com. All of the products are personally tried and tested by me, my family, and my clients. And finally, please do press the follow or subscribe button, depending which platform you're listening on. And above all, stay curious and stay free.